It's the Autosport Podcast. We dissect a dramatic Chinese Grand Prix and get excited about the 2018 driver market. Two races into the 2017 Formula One season, and the score between Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton is now 1-1. But even though Lewis Hamilton won the Chinese Grand Prix by just over 6 seconds, we've now had a little more evidence that Mercedes and Ferrari really might be evenly matched enough to produce a classic World Championship fight. My name is Edd Straw, the Editor-in-Chief of Autosport. Joining me today first is Lawrence Barretto, one of our full-time Formula One correspondents. After a few years of it being an all-silver fight, you must be enjoying having a Mercedes v Ferrari battle to write about.
Oh, definitely. There's only so many times you can write a report that says Lewis Hamilton or Nico Rosberg has won a Grand Prix. So it
was about 60, wasn't it?
It just felt you had to come up with different adjectives and different verbs to describe the same thing. So I'm delighted that we've
that is what the thesaurus is for, Lauren.
The writer's job summed up. You have to come up with all these nouns and verbs.
Hemingway used to think he'd done a cracking job if he'd put out 450 words in a day.
I do 450 words in 10-15 minutes.
Well, that's the difference between you and Hemingway, isn't it? When's your Nobel Prize for Literature coming, Lawrence?
I'll be waiting a long time, I think.
That other voice you've heard, I'm sure some of you will recognise it, is F1 Racing executive Edd Stuart Codling, who's becoming something of a cult hero on the Autosport podcast for his not only his insight, but also his interesting digressions. Now, I hear that your latest antics are two-wheeled and time trial related.
Yeah, I'm going to have to slide into McLaren press release mode here, because although my time in the first time trial of the season last Saturday was a slightly underwhelming by many measures, 26 minutes, 3 seconds. I'd take that for the first race of the season. And, of course, there's plenty of development to come in aerodynamics. Dare I say it, a little weight to come off the chassis, and probably a little bit of development to come from the engine as well, cycling being an engine formula.
At least you have reliability. You made it to the end.
Yeah, I made it to the end. I have to say that the deployment in a straight line was starting to fade and splatter a bit, but yeah, we got there.
Well, I'm sure you were talking up your drive as incredible and your best time trial ever and various other Alonso-esque comments.
If I'd had radio, I'd be pointing out that it was my magnificence and it was the engine that was dragging me down.
Anyway, back on four wheels, in the world of Grand Prix racing, the Chinese GP really was a fascinating race. Lawrence, was it a bit frustrating not to be able to see the Hamilton-Vettel battle play out properly up front?
In one way, you could have said yes if the race hadn't really peaked or picked up as it turned out to do, but I really enjoyed the Grand Prix. And
it was a great race, wasn't it? There was stuff going on most of the time, a few little quiet zones.
And I think a lot of people have been saying how boring F1 has been over the last few years, and I know that it's still Lewis Hamilton who's winning the Grand Prix, but it's what actually happened and how he got to that point, which was exciting. And I think there was enough in that race that we got 18 races to go till we can see Lewis and Sebastian battle it out. I thought this was a good race for the second one of the season.
People have been complaining that Grand Prix racing's boring and not as good as it used to be since Nuvolari was in nappies, though, haven't they?
Oh, exactly. It's always a standard thing. You see this when you look back through old issues of Autosport, Motorsport, other publications. In the 70s, people saying, well, it was much better in the 50s. In the 50s, people writing, well, it was much better pre-war.
Yes, I can't abide all these cars with sponsorship on.
Exactly. And saying that all this Mercedes and Auto Union business is all very well, but it's much better when Duesenberg were winning the French Grand Prix and that kind of thing. Anyway,
whatever happened to ride-on mechanics?
We've managed to go back about 100 years there. So moving back into the present, obviously the way the race played out, Hamilton was up front on his own pretty much the whole way through. The race hinged on this decision of Sebastian Vettel to pit under the virtual safety car early on. He was the only one of the top 6 to make that stop, to change from inters to slicks, although the rest of the field also came in. So we had this great setup when the race restarted after the virtual safety car of Vettel in 6th place. And the question of, right, well, when do the cars ahead of him stop? Can he jump Hamilton and gain track position with a few reasonable laps on slicks while Hamilton has to change onto the slicks later? So it was interestingly poised. But then after Giovinazzi crashed, obviously, there was another safety car. They all pitted, and all Vettel had done was sacrifice track position without any gain. Now, I think that was a perfectly reasonable strategy from Ferrari and Vettel.
Well, he wasn't to know, and it couldn't have been anticipated that the two Saubers would ping it off the road at more or less the same spot, and one of them would end up in the wall.
That was a tricky one, because you were watching the replay, weren't you, on board with Ericsson. You think, well, how's he going to turn that into the crash he's having?
Yeah.
Then, of course, you realise that Giovinazzi goes past and he goes off. But
I wonder if Giovinazzi was watching that unfold ahead of him and just kind of his brain slipped out of gear or something, because they both had sort of slightly similar accidents.
Could have been a bit of a distraction, I guess, but these things happen in tricky conditions.
I guess sometimes you do watch the driver in front, don't you, for the braking point. I guess if he just saw that Marcus went off, he might have followed him off, and then by the time it was too late to...
If nothing else, it was just a bit distracting. That can always knock you out of your comfort zone, shall we say. So everybody's happy with that decision that Ferrari made? To me, it seemed to be the logical move. I was surprised to see more of them didn't change at that point.
Well, I think Ferrari have been given a hard time in recent years for not making good strategic decisions. I think that one was worth doing.
No, absolutely, and it's fair, some of the criticism they've had, but that seemed logical to me, because everybody from 7th back came in, with the exception of Sainz, who'd already started on slicks. So
yeah, it was one of those things where it was quite early, but then again, we had one driver start the race on slicks, so
and then go off instantly.
Yeah, so there was a question of whether it was too early, and obviously the other people decided it was, and Ferrari decided it wasn't, and that's the sort of judgment call you make. And obviously the nearer the front you are and the more track position you sacrifice, the more you look like a fool when it doesn't come off. This time it was a reasonable gamble, like you say.
How do we think it would have played out had Giovinazzi not crashed, had we just had green flag racing? Obviously it wouldn't have been long before the top 5 drivers had to come in for slicks, presumably under, well, in this scenario it would have been under green flag conditions, so it would all been about the gap of Vettel up to Hamilton, and there's a reasonable chance that he would have gained track position, surely.
It's likely, and also you have to sort of look at the way it panned out. It's a shame because we can't really measure the Mercedes performance as accurately as we'd like, because for quite a long time in that race, Lewis wasn't really put under much pressure. So there was that point during the late teens of the race where it kind of looked like they might be able to go to the end on the same set of tyres, and the order looked quite set, and he looked very, very in control of things up front, while Vettel was bottled up behind the Red Bulls and his own teammate. But then Vettel got very racy, very impressively, and began to put him under a bit of pressure. But even then, he was sort of quite a way ahead. So I'm not sure we kind of saw everything Mercedes had in terms of pace.
I suspect it would have been a question of track position, wouldn't it? Had Vettel gained track position through that virtual safety car and the subsequent green flag period that didn't happen because of Giovinazzi, I suspect he'd have been able to stay there, assuming the second pit stop phase was executed correctly by everyone.
No, I'd agree. I think so. And the thing with the way that this result ended up is that with Lewis out in front, and as you said, the gap never got smaller. Was it the final stint? Seb was catching him.
The final stint, Vettel, over the last 19 laps on average, he was 0.170 seconds faster, with the caveat that Hamilton had a pretty big gap in his pocket. So I'm pretty sure Hamilton would have left something on the table. But what it looked like to me is there were 2 cars with similar race performance there.
Yeah, there's still a few unknowns left in this season, which is pretty good from our point of view, as we're looking forward to another race this weekend. That there's still a lot we don't know. That they are sort of known unknowns, as Rumsfeld might have put it.
Yeah, so we could get into what the unknown unknowns are, but that would be pure speculation. Now, Ben Anderson's Grand Prix report, he's our Grand Prix editor, it was headlined "How Ferrari's Other Drivers Cost Vettel a Victory Shot." So obviously, first we had the Giovinazzi crash, the Ferrari Junior, in the Sauber, which wiped out the potential advantage of the virtual safety car gamble. Although, I should add, it's not a foregone conclusion that Vettel would have been able to lap quickly enough in slicks, possibly losing tyre temperature on a still damp track. So that would have been an interesting one. I think you can say with absolute confidence, but I'd probably lean towards the fact I think he might well have done, because I don't think Hamilton would have gone that much longer. He didn't suggest he had much life left in the intermediates. So we then had this situation with Ricciardo, Verstappen, Raikkonen, Vettel together running second through to fifth. Verstappen got past Ricciardo, so we then had Verstappen, Ricciardo, Raikkonen, Vettel, and Vettel lost about 5.5 seconds. So this was pretty costly, and to me it seems that was an area where maybe Ferrari should have intervened and say, Kimi, can you let him go and just have a go at the Red Bulls?
You don't know if they might have been actually saying that, because we don't hear all the communications. And it is interesting, that little battle, because I was just thinking about going to make a cup of tea, and I kind of thought the order at the front was set, and I thought Seb's not going to past Raikkonen here, is he? He's just going to sit behind him, and pretty soon he's going to start whining over the radio. And lo and behold, he barges past him, and it's a brilliant overtake. Raikkonen just sort of totally caught napping. And it was a lovely example of what Martin Brundle now calls organic overtaking. No DRS required.
China's been one of those circuits where we've seen that of it. Obviously, a few years ago, when Hamilton won by passing Vettel, obviously Vettel was stealing himself near the end of the race for the attack into the hairpin at the end of the DRS zone, and Hamilton thought, actually, I'm going to mug you before that when you're not really expecting it. But we did see some great overtaking from Vettel. Obviously, he passed Raikkonen on lap 20. That was a dive up the inside of turn 6 that did seem to take Raikkonen by surprise. Only took him 2 laps to get past Ricciardo. And I guess this is the key question, isn't it? The fact that Raikkonen couldn't seem to attack Ricciardo properly, whereas Vettel only took 2 laps to make his pass at the same place, albeit he attacked around the outside of turn 6, and they had a little wheel banging moment on the run out of it, Vettel and Ricciardo. Was Raikkonen really costing Vettel that much? Do you think that was a poor strategic move from Ferrari to allow it to happen?
Well, it depends what Ferrari's approach wants to be. Do they want to let their drivers race, or do they want to win this title and go back to the days when they put all their backing behind Schumacher and, to pick one driver to do it? At the moment, it seems a little bit early to be telling new drivers to move over. I think the second race of the season, it seems a little bit unfair.
But it's more about race situation, because I would argue that if in the next race the situation's reversed and Raikkonen's clearly quicker and behind Vettel, that's when you release Raikkonen, because it's swings and roundabouts, rather than saying whatever happens, one driver is let past. Let's say he let him pass straight away at the restart, and then Vettel passed Ricciardo and Verstappen in short order. It would have been a very different race at the front. So Ferrari potentially had a result there that could have been stronger. So that's the question, isn't it? Rather than just favouring a driver, it's more whichever one's quicker. And we've seen teams like Red Bull have done little swaps at times when one driver or the other is quicker.
But then you've also got to make a decision, how long do you give Kimi to try and get past? Because you've still got to give him a chance. He's got track position at that point. And I guess it's all going in super fast mode for them. So time goes on and they just wanted to, give him enough time to do it. I think it was fine. 5.5 seconds, fine. That might have made the difference here. But I think what they did there and not getting involved was the right thing to do.
I'd have been on the team radio saying, Kimi, Sebastian is faster than you. And if he gave me any lip back, I'd just say talk to the hand, because the face ain't listening anymore. That's
the kind of pit-to-car radio we don't hear enough of. I think we need a bit more of...
We basically need Patrick Head back, don't we?
Yes. I think that would cause all manner of interesting scenarios. That'd be brilliant.
Whatever it is that you do it better.
Driving fast and overtaking in this case. Yeah. Vettel's move on Ricciardo, we briefly mentioned, was a really spectacular moment as well. Ricciardo was wise to the fact that he may have a punt up the inside into turn 6, I guess. He will either have seen what happened in his mirrors or have been told by the team, that's where Vettel did it, watch out for it. And obviously he managed to kind of contest the corner, and then they just had this little rub, which they both seemed to quite enjoy. That's, I think, a moment of the race that almost wasn't talked about enough. So it's great to see two drivers leaning on each other. I think Vettel said elbows out, and Ricciardo said he'd be lying if he said it wasn't deliberate, in terms of he was sort of squeezing Vettel and Vettel was squeezing a bit. So
nice and clean, wasn't it? Puff of smoke, tyre decals gone on the side. You couldn't see the Pirelli logos anymore. Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
It's two drivers who clearly have a bit of respect for each other, but also not giving each other any cause for. And then, of course, we saw the move on Verstappen, which was only 6 laps later. But that was Vettel obviously taking advantage of Verstappen having a big lock-up, and Verstappen was in the pits a couple of laps later. But do you remember the days when everyone used to say Vettel couldn't overtake?
Yeah, exactly. He could only lead a race from the front, etc., etc. He's quietly putting a few myths to bed this year, really.
I think he always could overtake. It's just that quite often with Red Bull, he was up front.
And he didn't have
to, yeah.
Exactly. But remember, we saw that great pass at Monza on Alonso, and he took a bite of the grass coming out of the Curva Grande. That was a brilliant overtake. I think people do respect Vettel a bit more maybe than they used to. It's amazing what a bit of time as an underdog does for a driver's reputation, when people realise actually they're pretty good.
Yeah. Sadly, this comes too late to save the German Grand Prix, but hey ho.
Well, there we go. That's another story. Although that may be returning in the future, hopefully. So once Vettel was in clear air, he chipped away a little bit. We had the pit stop phases. Verstappen triggered this period of the second stops. There was a bit of talk that the Mercedes drivers might go to the end. I guess the Ferrari drivers were thinking they could go to the end because they were also on softs, whereas the two Red Bulls had taken super softs. So once Vettel was through, Hamilton said he was quite chilled up to this point. Then when Vettel was through, he thought, okay, this has woken up a bit into a little bit more of a race.
I guess Hamilton never really felt threatened by the Red Bulls, just in terms of the performance of the two cars, and he knows obviously from Australia how hard or what a threat Vettel is. So yeah, I'm not surprised that he didn't feel so chilled once he knew Sebastian was behind him.
I'm very glad that it didn't turn out to be one of those races where you could go to the end, because it has been a very delicate balance, hasn't it, with the tyres, that the drivers wanted a tyre that they could lean on without destroying it. But at the end, at the same time, you don't want to go back to the Bridgestone days of probably arguably not even needing to stop if you didn't have to. And this race seems to have taken that quite delicate balance and pushed on. And we've seen drivers able to lean on the tyres, but at the same time, they haven't been able to go all the way to the end.
It's nice to have a little bit of uncertainty as well. Obviously, they're unfamiliar with the tyres, so the range is a little bit of an unknown. We saw that in Australia. That had an impact, obviously, on Hamilton's decision as to when he pitted. It was quite cold in China, so that created some slightly unusual conditions with whether you're able to get the tyres switched on, etc., and that can impact the way the tyres work. So we just got to hope this is able to continue. I do have a feeling
it's going to become a known and not a known unknown, isn't it?
I think the known is going to be that we're going to see quite a lot of one-stop races, but you never know. It's still in that learning period. Now, talking of Vettel's overtaking, obviously there was a lot of talk before this race, certainly on this podcast. I'm not sure it was so much talked about elsewhere, about the impact the DRS would have. In Australia, the straights aren't really long enough for them to have a big impact. Obviously, we've got this 1.2 kilometre back straight on the run up to the hairpin, where you can use DRS, and also on the start-finish straight. And we weren't seeing drive-by passes. We weren't actually seeing a monstrous amount of passes at the hairpin, as you can see from the fact that Vettel had to make his passes at turn 6 on Ricciardo and on Raikkonen. Now, that seems to me to be quite a good balance.
That's why I really like this race. I thought it was quality over quantity. Yeah, we didn't have that much overtaking, but then we could watch NASCAR if we want lots of overtaking. I think here drivers really had to work hard to make a pass stick, and they look like the passes look good. And that's what I think people want to see. That's going to get people interested again, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, there was an edge to it. When you have DRS not acting as an overtaking tool in itself, but as a kind of enabler where it enables, which was the objective, cruise,
to contest, not just to drive by.
Yeah, you can basically you rope your opponent in and lasso them and draw closer to them, and then you just have to brazen it out somewhere on the track, and that's what we saw. It wasn't happening necessarily at the end of the straight at that hairpin. It was going on elsewhere after they'd got into range, and it wasn't just Vettel. Yeah, we saw quite a lot of overtaking here and there, which it worked for me. I was very, very pleased by the quality.
Again, it'll be interesting to see how it pans out over a larger sample set of races. Bahrain coming up next is a place where you can pass reasonably. Russia has been a bit hit and miss, shall we say. Barcelona has always been fairly poor for overtaking. Monaco. Once we get into six races into the season, we'll have had a bit of a range to see whether it's the right balance. But all these things feed in: the pace of the cars, the tyres, the DRS, the track configuration. And the balance feels like it's not too bad at the moment.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I mean, like you said, early days, we've had Australia, which isn't a representative circuit, and China generally overtaking has been possible. So it's just too early to say, isn't it, I think?
The key is to not get suckered by these outlier races where overtaking is tricky, and to enjoy it while you have it. Circuits like China, Bahrain's a good one, and there are other ones. Once we get over the month of May hump of Barcelona and Monaco, where it's tricky to overtake for slightly different reasons, we then go to other places where overtaking's more likely again in the more organic fashion. So I think we'll just have sort of tighten our seatbelts for the inevitable complaints that will spring up over the next month, and hope that the summer brings better.
But you see, I think if we have a title battle to talk about, there'll be fewer complaints because people just won't be searching for something to complain about. They'll have something to hold on to. So.
Nice clean title battle as well, and for now. Because for now they're talking about respecting each other greatly. It can't be long before someone does something that causes that to go out the pram, surely.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Codders. It's very easy to be matey when it's early days in the championship fight, but when the stakes get higher, it'll be interesting to see how those two react, because we haven't properly seen them have a full-on title battle. Yes, they were both contenders going down to the last round in 2010, but a proper Vettel-Hamilton rivalry is something that's looking pretty exciting, and that's what it's looking like this year. Only 2 races, lots of caveats there. But it feels like this is absolutely setting up to be a Hamilton versus Vettel two-piece, isn't it, Lawrence?
The other thing is, towards the end of last year, when things weren't going right, Sebastian was throwing his toys out the pram. Lewis is famous for throwing his toys out the pram. So I think when things go together, I think it could be a really explosive kind of rivalry.
I've just got this vision of them lobbing toys at each other.
Yeah, it's going to be like some sort of meltdown in a branch of Toys R Us, isn't it?
Maybe something like Mario Kart. They can get the red shell, green shell, start playing that.
Yeah, that would be great.
That would spice up the show, yeah.
Bananas. Well, as we know, Ross Brawn is famous for his pit wall consumption of bananas, so he'd probably be able to get behind the idea of lobbing a banana skin onto the track.
Certainly creates a curveball, so to speak. I think I'm potentially mixing my metaphors.
You are mixing your metaphors. How are you going to introduce that weird bullet thing that causes an oil splat to appear on the screen?
And that thing that... Obviously, you can shrink all your rivals and run them over.
And you can run them over, flat them, yeah.
Forget all the other ideas. Mario Kart's the model. Now, outside of the top two, obviously we had Kimi Raikkonen, we've mentioned a little bit, in the second Ferrari, Valtteri Bottas in the Mercedes. Now, on Raikkonen, Ferrari have been fairly positive about Raikkonen over the past few years. Obviously, since he went back in 2014, it's been a tricky time for him. He hasn't matched the results of his teammates. Podiums have been relatively rare. Now, Sergio Marchionne, the Ferrari chairman, did, on his way out of the paddock, confirm that he'd spoken to team principal Maurizio Arrivabene about Raikkonen's performance. He said, I talked about this with Maurizio. Maybe they should sit around a table and he should talk to him. Today, he seemed to be busy with other stuff. Vettel was more aggressive. Now, that's quite interesting. I wouldn't necessarily say the Chinese Grand Prix was that terrible from Raikkonen. I don't think it was a brilliant race, but...
Just underwhelming. Again.
Yeah, I think it was... all right, but it does seem interesting. There's a little bit of pressure building there on Raikkonen. Do we think that's fair?
I personally don't think it is fair. We're only in the second race of the season. And I think the fact that Sebastian's having such a good start, it's only made Kimi look worse than perhaps he potentially is. Maurizio spent a lot of time last year putting his arm around Kimi's shoulder, trying to protect him, while Sergio Marchionne was putting pressure on Sebastian and saying he wasn't doing such a good job. So, they're two very different approaches. Now Sergio's turned his attention to Kimi. It'll just be interesting to see how that pans out. I can't imagine Kimi's going to take it too well, that approach.
The good cop, bad cop treatment. Maybe sometimes someone does need to go and slam a desk. Maybe they should send Toto Wolff around. He's good at banging tables.
It's one of his new skills. I find Raikkonen difficult. He has a lot of ability, but for me, it's not just two races. It's going back to Ferrari in 2014. So he's had 14, 15, 16, and now the start of 17. Yes, I think at times over the second half of 15, in qualifying, maybe more so than the races, his performance relative to Vettel was pretty decent. But I've still not seen the kind of consistent level that I'd expect to see a driver of that rank, a world champion ultimately. That's what I want to see from a driver like Raikkonen. Again, I think maybe it was a little bit exaggerated in this race. Obviously, he had the problem with not being in the correct engine setting in that part of the race when he couldn't get past Ricciardo.
Well, it's his own fault.
It does appear to have been his fault and related to not switching back to the dry condition settings that would give him that maximum punch off the corner, the long right hander that leads onto the back straight. But it's not Raikkonen's worst race, and it was all right. But I can see why Ferrari could get frustrated with him, particularly if you have a scenario where you need your second drivers. You know, if there's a day where Ferrari's strong and has an advantage, you need a 1-2 with Hamilton third. And I think even though Bottas has been maybe a little bit patchy in his first two races, you'd expect Bottas to be able to back up Hamilton at least in 1-2. So that's where it'll become a bit of a concern.
You mentioned that you've been slightly disappointed with Kimi since 2014. But Ferrari should know what they've signed, and so there's only so annoyed that they can be with Kimi because they know exactly what he's capable of.
Well, that's true. They did pay him an awful lot of money not to drive for them in 2010.
He's done well out of them, hasn't he? Being paid to go and then paid to come back again.
Yeah, no, you are right though. I think that's valid that Ferrari did know what they were getting into, but it's interesting when the pressure really, really starts to be applied when you're battling for Constructors and Drivers' Championship. It'll be interesting to see whether that's what they say. I don't take what Marchionne said too seriously because you're quite right, Lawrence, that he's thrown a few little grenades in there now and then, and ultimately I'm not so worried about that. It's more interesting to see what the perception is in the team and whether they think he's actually able to deliver the support to Vettel that they need. You never know. He's actually always gone pretty well at Bahrain, Raikkonen. That's one of his circuits you'd expect him to go strongly at, whatever happens. So it could be that this weekend he picks up and he delivers a good result.
I suppose the other question you have to ask yourself, and it's probably a question that the powers that be at Ferrari have asked themselves, which is how can we improve on this situation? If we were to fire Kimi and in theory get a faster driver in to replace him, a more competitive driver, what effect would that have in terms of destabilising our highly paid lead driver? And would it actually deliver better results in terms of the Constructors' Championship and the Drivers' Championship? And the answer to that is, not necessarily. Who out there would you actually put in that seat? Who's available? Would you put Alonso in? Great driver, but you've just parted company with him. Is there anyone else who's a mega that was available and wouldn't tread on Vettel's toes?
It's a tight little window to park yourself in, if you like, in that you want a driver who's good enough to be there, but not quite strong enough to be a challenge. Someone like Carlos Sainz Jr. is coming on well. He might well be available next year. There's a few drivers out there who could be of interest further back. Ultimately, it's going to be down to what happens over the next 6, 7, 8 races. Will start to give a little bit of a shape to the season for Raikkonen. I think he needs to be there, kind of supporting and in behind Vettel in a way that maybe hasn't been yet. But obviously, there's also the question of Mercedes with Bottas. It's been a bit of a difficult start to him. I had fairly high expectations for Bottas. However, Australia was fine. It was fine. He wasn't that happy with it. China could have been fine, but looping the car under the safety car, warming your tyres, is not a good thing to do. He described it as a stupid mistake. He called it amateur, and he reckoned he could have been second without it. But that's not a great weekend from Bottas. So there's also question marks there, although possibly with the fact that he's new into the team, etc., you can make a few more allowances. But from my perspective, how the first 4 or so races go is pretty important in terms of the die being cast for what his role is there and how they perceive him within the team, and not getting into a downward spiral.
Goes to show the importance of the package, or the driver as a package, doesn't it? Because it's one thing to be capable of turning a quick lap, and we know Bottas is quick, but you also have to be able to do it lap after lap and not make silly mistakes. And you have to be on it pretty much all the time, and that's what you get when you employ Lewis Hamilton. You have someone who, 9 times out of 10 delivers his best. He has, these odd moments where he kind of drifts off. You get the odd race where he's not quite on it, but those are more obvious to us looking from the outside in, because they happen, because they are conspicuous by their unusual nature. Most of the time, he is at 10 tenths and absolutely on it.
And I guess so far it doesn't look like Bottas is off that level, or at least on the same level as Lewis at the moment. But that doesn't mean that on occasion he can't challenge Lewis. He seems to think, he's perfectly capable of doing it. Toto seems to think he's quick as well. Apart from that silly mistake, I don't think this weekend was that bad for him.
No, the weekend was fine.
And I guess, fine isn't brilliant, is it, if you're racing for the world champion? But that's, it wasn't terrible. So I just think that, give him a few more races to settle in. As long as this doesn't hit him too hard and he can learn to take, bad scenarios well, then, I think we should give him a little bit more time.
That's the big question, isn't it? He's got some time, but it just needs to avoid putting the pressure on himself. I know he said when he was interviewed by Jonathan Noble earlier in the year, before testing started, he said, yes, I want to make a good start, but if things don't start brilliantly, I'm not going to be putting massive amounts of pressure on myself, because he knows that that's not the way to do things. Of course, as I think, Cod, as you've said in the past, it's all well and good to say that when you're sat down in a nice comfy room, drinking a cup of tea, doing a relaxed interview pre-season. It's a little bit different when there's that desperation, or you're heading down to the first corner. So what I'd hope Bottas does is he is able to keep a cool head and not feel he has to kind of force the issue and just let his ability come through, because he is a very good driver. But scenarios like this have proved a bit too much, often mentally rather than just in terms of pure talent, if you want to use that. And talent's a dangerous shorthand, I think, when you're talking about people in sport. But I think that's the key thing. If he can just go about his business, do what he does, he should kind of come out of this and do a decent job. But if he's trying to force the issue, that's when it's going to go wrong. Now, we did mention Carlos Sainz as well. Obviously, he was best of the rest outside the big three teams. He was the only one outside Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari not to be lapped. He took that big gamble to start on slicks, which he said after the race everybody in the team thought he was mad doing that, and it did go a little bit wrong at the start when he went off, and I think he had a little brush of the wall. But obviously it did turn out to be a good decision, and he drove another really strong race. It's not surprising because we know how good Sainz is. Last season he came on really well. Basically, once Verstappen was out of the team, he seemed to really come to the fore. So how impressed are we with Sainz?
I'm really impressed with Sainz. I think that was his 4th point scoring finish in the last 6 races, including the back end of
Which,
last year.
when you consider he had an old engine at the back end of last year.
Exactly. And he seems to be outperforming Daniel Kvyat as well. That's the bare minimum that he's got to achieve this year. Science has always said that he's quick in wet conditions or changeable conditions. It's one thing to say it, it's another to actually consistently do it. And he seems to have always, when these situations have presented themselves, he seemed to have done it. It didn't look so hot early on when he had that spin, then he tried to get back onto the track, hit the barrier, then came back on it. It was looking a bit ropey at that point. But then he was setting faster laps. He doesn't seem to let things faze him. That's what I think is quite interesting.
It sort of fits into the category of being a quietly brilliant race, that, because the only time you really saw him was when he had that sort of little I fell at the beginning, and you really actually had to be having your second screen with the timing and scoring up and be paying attention to actually see him being so consistent lap after lap, because he was almost in a race of his own, because he was in that hinterland as best of the rest, but he was so much better than everyone else that he wasn't in a battle, so he just wasn't being shown on the screen. So if you were just consuming this race passively as a casual fan, that great performance might have passed you by, which is a tragedy, because that he should rank that as one of the best performances of his career, really.
It's interesting, that little midfield pack, because basically whoever's finishing at the front of it in what is normally 7th place, or could be 6th or 5th depending on retirements, is generally doing a good job. The thing I like about Sainz, isn't it, it's been touched on there, is I always look at drivers doing what I call executing races, which is not just about being quick, but it's about being quick throughout, not making mistakes, what happened at the start, allowing, just being consistent and able just to elevate yourself ahead of those behind you. And he was a very, very clear 7th. There was a big gap back to the rest of the point scorers. So that's really positive for Sainz. And his future is going to be very interesting, because if he keeps this up, then people are going to be seriously looking at him. And he's had 3 years at Toro Rosso, so it's kind of getting to the point where Red Bull-wise, either he needs to be into the Red Bull A team. I can only really see him staying with Toro Rosso if he's absolutely got a cast iron guarantee that he'll step up to the A team down the line, which I doubt he's going to get with Ricciardo and Verstappen there for the near future. So what do we think for Sainz? He does look like a driver now who has got a top team future.
He's doing absolutely everything that he can to put himself in the best position, and when the seat does come up, he's in a good position to take it. The trouble is, like you said, there are no gaps for him, or no clear gaps of where he's going to slot in. So he's just doing what he can do on the track, and I think that's the best that he can do.
Yeah, there's talk that he is on the Williams radar.
He was on the Williams radar when they were looking at replacing Bottas, and there was a phone call, and it was suggested that no, they would not be interested in letting him go. So that's logical. Surely there'll be a seat at Williams next year, because I can't imagine they'll keep Massa.
Yeah, Massa has, after a sort of moderately impressive start, he was a little bit woeful during the race on Sunday, wasn't he? And obviously, Lance is locked in there, and hopefully will come better. I think he was very unlucky to get taken out right at the start there. What you have to think about with Williams is, are they going to be able to offer Carlos a competitive platform? I suppose they will be able to do something once Paddy Lowe's got his feet under the table. The question is whether he'll be able to execute enough of a change in the short term, because they'll already be laying down the concept of next year's car, and they seem to have created a car that follows the same mechanical themes and the aerodynamic themes as seasons past, and has all the same virtues and vices.
Yeah, I think Williams is very much a team that's at that level, isn't it? It's a good, decently run team that will do a good job, but it's not going to be necessarily a team that's going to be launching you to race wins. So, but it is quite interesting. I think there's scope for things moving around in the driver market next year. There's all sorts of questions over, will Raikkonen stay at Ferrari? The perennial question comes back. Bottas, Mercedes future. There's a seat at Williams. What's Alonso going to do? It's a little bit early for this now, but I think in a few months' time there's going to be some really interesting scenarios being talked about with some of these guys, and it's going to be down to people like Sainz to keep delivering, so they're in the forefront of people's minds.
McLaren might have a vacancy, but would you want to go there right now?
Well, it's an interesting place at the moment. Obviously, Alonso had his usual good effort. Amazingly, he's running the points for 84% of the laps he's completed this year.
And he does enjoy reminding people of that, doesn't he?
Well, yes. Looking back over the weekend, he described the qualifying performance as a divine present, presumably from himself to McLaren. I think that was the undertone. And he described his race as incredible, and he is getting everything he can out of that McLaren Honda package. There's no question about that.
He doesn't need a press officer, basically, because he does all his own PR.
He does seem to be talking himself up a lot.
It's something he's very good at doing, isn't it? Talking himself up, saying good things about and promoting himself.
But he talks himself up and he talks himself out as well. So, how many good situations has he fallen out of? When he looks back, when he sits by the fireside with a glass of cognac or whatever down the line and a cigar, and looks back at his career, he will rue a lot of occasions where he's found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time because of slight chippiness and intransigence and falling out with teams.
Well, that's why he's ended up at McLaren.
Pretty much. And to be fair, I think they're flattered by his performance, so they won't be in a crashing hurry to get rid of him. Certainly they won't view the sight of him waltzing out the door. It won't be as welcome as it was at the end of 2007 when they absolutely hated him. But he is over delivering in that car at the moment for sure.
Obviously, mentioning this midfield scrap that Alonso was in, he reckons he probably could have hung on for a point or two in that race. We had Kevin Magnussen back in the points, I think the first time since Singapore last year. That's his first points finish for Haas. Very decent race performance. Finished 8th. Good to see Haas confirming their speed. And also good for Magnussen, who's an interesting driver, who's obviously now in his third different team. I know, Lawrence, you wrote a piece earlier this year about how important it is for him to kind of really prove that I think we all know Magnussen's got ability, but the fact he's been through McLaren and then Renault and had to move again means that there's this need for him to achieve some equilibrium and just say, right, this is my home now for the next few years. I'm going to show that I can do it week in, week out. He's certainly got the ability.
Definitely. I mean, second chances are very rare in F1, and he's got a third chance really at Haas, and it's a different kind of outfit and much smaller. So if he can't make it work here and he couldn't make it work at a manufacturer, who is going to want to take him kind of beyond this year? So like you said, it was a very tidy drive. I know Gunther Steiner said before the start of the season that he expected Kevin to match Roman, and to be honest, that's what Roman probably needed to take that next step, because he probably got quite comfortable last year. He's comfortably beaten Esteban, so he probably needs that push, and that should hopefully drag that team forward.
Funny, isn't it, to think about drivers getting into a comfort zone when they easily beat a teammate? But that does seem to be the case. And Kevin is he's quite a funny fish, really, isn't he? Because there's this perception that he doesn't really try hard enough, and I think that's because he is very laid back in his demeanour, and he seems to be one of those people that, because he doesn't shout and strop and throw his toys out the pram when things go wrong, people sometimes mistake that for not taking it seriously enough and not wanting it enough, whereas basically he's just being undemonstrative and being he's got that Scandinavian mask of froideur.
I think, though, to complement that, you have also got the fact that in several of those teams, and in fact in his junior career, there people who've worked with him have said there is sometimes a little bit of a degree of inattentiveness and maybe not that drive to always constantly improve. It's kind of that feeling that you get to one level with something and then him not pushing on to get to that next level. But that's sometimes an experience thing as well. As you build that life experience, hopefully he should be able to get on top of that.
There's that story about his dad when his dad was driving for Jackie Stewart and Rubens Barrichello was his teammate, that Sir Jackie eventually, in a bid to close the gap between them, because Rubens was showing Jan Magnussen the way, they actually showed Jan into the motorhome, sat him in front of a computer, said, look, here's Rubens' telemetry traces, here's your telemetry traces, now read and observe and learn, see where he's faster than you, etc. So Jackie walks down the steps out of the motorhome, hears this sort of click, 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 click of a mouse, think, oh yeah, he's concentrating, and it's click, click, click on the mouse, click, click, click. Comes back 10 minutes later and still click, click, click going on. Finds he's playing Minesweeper.
Yeah, that's. I don't think we put Kevin into quite that bracket.
No, he's not quite like that.
If Magnussen keeps delivering at that level, I don't think there'll be question marks. We know there's a driver in there, so hopefully he'll keep delivering. That'll be good news for Haas, good news for him, good news for Formula One to have a driver of that ability. And he will have to, given how congested that midfield is, because the guys who are going to be finishing 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th are going to have their work cut out, because it's going to be very small margins that make the difference between being 8th and being 12th. Looking back to the build-up of the race, obviously on Friday we saw a lot of disruptions with a helicopter not able to fly, the medical helicopter. No, it could fly, but not being able to land at the hospital in Shanghai, 38 kilometres away. There is obviously the need to be able to get people out in the case of neurological injuries in particular, if they need treatment, to a designated hospital, and if it couldn't land, then you couldn't run. FP1, there were 2 red flag periods, there wasn't that much running. FP2 was lost completely. Obviously there was a little bit of criticism about that, but I think this is just fairly sensible, isn't it?
I think the fact is, if there had been an accident, the same people who were complaining probably about the fact that there was no action would be complaining, or there would be a concern about why wasn't this, procedure looked into? Why can't the medical helicopter land at the hospital? You should have known that, and we should have taken off. But I think the wider problem is pollution's always been a problem in China. So surely by going to China in the first place, you know that could be potentially an issue, and if you know that's going to be an issue, then sort the road access out beforehand, before you even get there.
Well, the fact there was quite quickly a solution put in place. Obviously, the FIA arranged for a police escort on the roads if it was required, which they didn't have on Friday. And they also, in time for the race day, equipped a close-by hospital with neurological equipment and staff with equipment to treat neurological injuries, neurological traumas, which was in the Rujin, which is probably the wrong pronunciation, hospital. That's actually in Jiading, because we call it the Shanghai circuit. It is close to Shanghai, but it's just sort of to the northwest of the city. So when you're there, when we stay there for the Chinese Grand Prix, you often don't feel like you're in Shanghai because you're a bit further out. Some people stay downtown. Quite often we end up staying quite close to the circuit. So that hospital was only 5 kilometres away. So that seemed to be quite an elegant solution. You could say that probably, as you said, Lawrence, because visibility can be a problem there, low cloud on top of the smog, there's a lot of industrial activity in that area, and indeed when you get to Shanghai and you're around for a bit, it's not long before you feel your kind of chest just
you get the China cough, don't you?
Exactly, yes. So maybe that would have been a sensible contingency to have in place anyway.
What we do need to look at it as is from a point of view of sensible contingencies, because this is one of those issues where out come the armchair experts, and you do read a lot of quite uninformed or misinformed opinions being spouted. For instance, people saying, why can't the on-site medical facility be equipped to deal with these sort of injuries? And realistically, I think there are cost implications to doing such a thing. I'm sure you
There's
could.
also quite a high level of specialisation, both in terms of the skill set and the training and the equipment.
It's people who've watched a few too many episodes of ER or Holby City or whatnot, and think that any hospital can do anything.
Well, I imagine in a scenario where in your time trial you came off your bike and suffered a serious head injury, you wouldn't be anticipating the St John's ambulance people to to do the serious legwork.
Yeah, when he breaks out the hand drill and says, "I'm afraid we're just going to have to alleviate the pressure on your skull. Hold on a second, I need a 3-pin plug to get this thing." Yeah, it's not like that, and I think it does the FIA a disservice, because they do put on a very high standard of medical backup. And interestingly, 3 or 4 years ago, I did a feature for F1 Racing about the medical car and its occupants and the general backup in Shanghai. So I went and met Dr. Ian Roberts, who is a very highly qualified anaesthetist who rides in the medical car. He will have a local doctor with him in that medical car, and we went in to look at the medical facilities, which was spick and span and unused. And he explained to me that the purpose of this facility is to stabilise a driver. So when the medical car reaches the scene of an accident, it is Dr. Roberts' task to establish the nature of the the nature of the injury. Yeah, working out the nature of the industry. That'll be let's just work out what exactly industry am I in here? Crushed by the wheels of industry, but that's Heaven 17 and not to power at all. It's his job to work out the nature of the injury and then stabilise the driver such that they can be transported to the medical facility where they can be properly stabilised for transport transport to a hospital where there's an emergency room where all the intensive care that is necessary can be provided, because it's in the nature of a major injury where you require intensive care. You could be in there for days, and you do not want to be putting a driver into an induced coma in a race circuit in the middle of nowhere. So the people who think that you should just, bus in some medics and get George Clooney to head them up for a Grand Prix weekend, they are living in La La Land.
I think it is very, very easy to be flippant about these sorts of things and just say, oh, well, why wasn't it done? But of course, not all, but I imagine some of the people criticising that will be the same people if something goes wrong in that sort of scenario, saying, well, why was this allowed to happen? It's very easy to say that. And I think that, with the exception of maybe the FIA for the future should look at equipping that local hospital in the same way, and especially given the roads in China, making sure there is capacity for a police escort. I think in terms of the decision-making process, it was very sensible. And it was great to see, incidentally, Lewis Hamilton crossing the start-finish straight with a few members of the Mercedes team, signing caps, throwing them into the crowd, giving them a little bit of entertainment. I think it was good to see that effort being put in by him at a time when various other drivers weren't doing that. Not necessarily, I think, because they didn't want to. Probably they just didn't think of it.
No, well, that in itself is a problem, isn't it? That drivers don't think about. We often we describe that status of being lost in F1, don't we? That some people just so in the bubble they don't realise that they don't really have much perspective on the outside world. It was a very good move by Lewis, and he's shaping up to be a great ambassador for the sport. It would be good if more people did that rather than having to be told to. FIA mandated. Perhaps the FIA could start fining drivers for not doing that instead of not turning up for the national anthems on time.
Well, there's another story. Yeah, Ricciardo and Perez getting reprimands for being late to that. I can understand why they have to be. Sometimes herding F1 drivers can be like herding cats, can't it? So I can understand why they take that sort of procedural thing seriously. Although
just have someone rattling a treat packet at the head of the queue.
I think that's pretty much the level of the incentive. Now, we also had a little bit of talk this weekend about the future shape of the Grand Prix calendar. The Malaysian Grand Prix at Sepang is being dropped. Lawrence, so you've covered the Malaysian Grand Prix. I think we've all been out there quite a few times. Is that a big loss for F1? It feels still to me like a new race, but it's been there almost 2 decades now. So this actually is an established race being lost.
It's crazy, isn't it? Isn't 1999 was the first Malaysian Grand Prix?
Yeah, first year, yeah.
Time's flown by since then. The trouble for Malaysia is that they've got Singapore right next door, and it puts on such a great race that is, if you want to go to Asia for a race, you're probably going to pick Singapore over Malaysia, even though Malaysia, I know the tickets are so much cheaper than going to Singapore. It's a shame. But if this means we're opening the door to perhaps let other circuits that have dropped off the calendar, the French Grand Prix returning next year, I think there's potentially talk of the German Grand Prix returning as well. It's possibly not such a bad thing. And who knows, they might just go away, think about it, try and work out a better scenario of how they want to play it, make the project work a bit better. And we might even get to this stage where we can rotate Grand Prix. So the Malaysian Grand Prix could come back every other year.
Wouldn't a Kuala Lumpur Petronas-funded street race going past the Twin Towers be absolutely stunning? Obviously, there has been a street race recently in Kuala Lumpur for a much lower level, but that shows it's possible. So maybe Petronas, which is a big sponsor of Mercedes, might be thinking about doing something of that nature, and that maybe could compete to an extent with Singapore.
Minute that, send it to Messrs Bratches, Brawn and Carey and get them to take it up. Should we be mentioning that I think the F1 survey is still up? I think if you're listening to this just after this has been uploaded to the internet, there may still be time to fill out the Global Fans Survey at motorsport.com.
Yeah, f1survey.motorsport.com is the place to go for that, for you to have your voice heard. It's been open for a few weeks, but you might just be able to squeeze in your opinion, and the results of that will be presented to the
rotate Grand
people.
Prix.
But there you go. Rotating Grand Prix. We have seen a few scenarios like that. We saw Hockenheim and Nürburgring rotating their slots for a bit. Admittedly, that was through financial expediency, although that would probably be the same for rotating races in the future, because Hockenheim had a deal with the local government where the losses of the races were covered by the local government. That couldn't happen for every year. Nürburgring obviously had its own separate problems. It's always worth remembering that region of Germany is fairly poor. There's not a lot of money to go around, so Nürburgring couldn't afford to keep staging the race, and Hockenheim couldn't go up to every every year at that stage. So maybe there's some financial expediency that could be at play across the board there. And it would be no bad thing to have that variety, because it does get a little bit predictable sometimes, the order of the Grand Prix. That said, Malaysia has moved to the back end of the season this year, which is where it started, obviously, but it's been early in the year for quite a long time.
It's kind of the end of an era, isn't it? Because Malaysia was the first of the new generation of Far Eastern Grand Prix and Bernie Ecclestone's move east, the big Tilkodromes, and that set everything in motion over the past sort of 17, 18 years.
It started the cascade of races like Korea, which we still enjoy going to.
Yeah, we love going to Korea, don't we?
India.
But doesn't that show how out of shape and distorted the Formula One commercial model is? And I don't want to step into the shoes of the absent Dieter Renken here and complain about the commercial settlement, but it shows what challenge Formula One's new owners have of unpicking what is a really, really distorted economic model where because the previous owners took on heavy leverage to buy it and then shook out whatever they could from it and burdened it with debt, it was very cash hungry. So you would go to these countries that would offer you pots and pots of money for the privilege of hosting a Grand Prix. You'd squeeze the existing races for more to the point where they were squeaking, and that propped up the whole enterprise. And now the challenge for Liberty Media is to find some way of putting it on a proper keel where it's not so cash hungry while also taking a profit, because that's what they do.
Well, looking a little bit more at the short term, there's not long to wait for the third round of the Vettel versus Hamilton battle, with free practice for the Bahrain Grand Prix kicking off on Friday. The renamed Formula 2 Championship also gets going in Bahrain. We will have a special edition of the Autosport podcast later in the week to look at the ramifications of the F2 name returning and preview the championship formerly known as GP2, as well as having a look at the upcoming European F3 and GP3 seasons. Thanks to Stuart Codling and Lawrence Barretto for joining me, Edd Straw, for this look back at the Chinese Grand Prix. Keep an eye on Autosport.com for all the latest news and features from F1 and the whole world of motorsport. And don't forget to pick up a copy of Autosport magazine, out every Thursday, and F1 Racing, out monthly. And if you enjoy our podcast, please subscribe via iTunes or any of the other usual podcast emporiums for more of the same on a regular basis. We'll be back soon with another Autosport podcast. Music is 6am by Trilo, written by Marcus Simmons. See soundcloud.com/Trilo Music.
The mega trunky is what my bicycle travels in when abroad.
So it's one of those big hard cases with the...
Yeah, that looks like the sort of thing you wheel a child round on, but it's
a pain to transport, as we found out when we went to Monaco.
Yeah, I can
it
imagine
was 2 years ago in Monaco, wasn't it? Yeah, it was pretty epic fitting it into the back of the car.
Yeah.
I seem to remember I had to just fold myself over the seat.
I'm pretty sure you were squeezed between it, kind of like that.
I was facing backwards in the car.
Is Mega Trunky the official name for it, or is that your pet name?
I think we described it as the mega trunky because sometimes
quite affectionate.
Children in airports look at it as if it's kind of like the trunky they want when they grow up.
What's a trunky?
Did you not see that episode of Dragon's Den?
I'm afraid not.
The trunky is a device first piloted on television's Dragon's Den, where the inventor had come up with this great idea of a suitcase for kids that basically is on wheels and you pull it. But the idea is that when the child, as inevitably children do in airports, lose their temper and get fed up with pulling their suitcase around, they can sit on it and ride round on it.
Okay. I think I may have seen something in this.
Now, I imagine that you sound very sceptical about this, and I imagine that if you were one of the dragons on Dragon's Den, you'd be more in the Duncan Bannatyne mold. I don't like you, don't like it, don't like it, for that reason I'm out.